Great. It is sharply 10 a.m. on my side. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of the JGF Dialogues. This is our third dialogue on a series of 3 dialogues that we've hosted. My name is Zolani Metu and I work for the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship as a Programs Officer. Today, we'll be exploring high-tech strategies for education in South Africa. And we've got a wonderful panel that I'll introduce to you to help us navigate this conversation. And hopefully, you walk away from this with great insights. So before we start with the dialogue, I'd like to introduce a colleague of mine who's going to give us a brief introduction of who Jakes Gerwel is and what we do as a fellowship. Her name is Mpho Mutloum. She's a Senior Program Officer within the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship. Mpho, I'd like to give you this opportunity really to take us through what JGF is and what we do.
Hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Zolani. I had to check, the internet is acting up quite bad this on my side, but I hope I'll be audible and people will be able to catch it. So good morning, everyone. My name is Mpho. As Zolani has said, I'm a Senior Programs Officer at Jakes Gerwel Fellowship. And I'm just here today to tell you a little bit about the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship. If I had the whole hour, I'd be excited to story, but Zolani has just given me 5 minutes to that. So it's simple. At Jakes Gerwel Fellowship, really, we believe in the power of education to change lives. And we do this through nurturing expert teachers who embrace innovation and lead change. And as you can see there, you see what we call our Path to Impact, which sees applicants entering the program and complete a 3-year degree at one of our university partners in South Africa. Our candidate fellows then proceed to complete a PGCE, which allows them to gain skills and qualify as a teacher. On qualification, our candidate fellows are then placed at partner schools where they get their 3-year induction and get a feel, of what the real class is like, with the hope that this will allow them to either stay in the classroom or in the school as expert teachers and facilitate the best learning outcomes in the most challenging of schools, or proceed and lead change in different areas of education. So their undergrad studies, our candidate fellows are allocated a program officer, such as myself or Zolani and my other colleagues, who become their coach and accountability partner for their academic performance and professional development. This is done through academic and professional development coaching, where fellows are empowered in skills such as goal setting, planning, self and time management. Jakes Gerwel fellows are also offered, there's a program, an intense program that is specific to each year group, where candidate fellows are exposed to different activities that allow them to decide and craft what their interest in education looks like. Candidate fellows are also offered support through fully paid tuition that covers tuition, accommodation, and any other financial need that they may have, so that they can focus on their academics and not have to worry about any other financial related expenses or problems. They also get psychosocial support through their candidate fellows. Through their program officers. We also use referral services through universities and other organizations that are available to help. To date, we have selected, I guess, just over 75 candidate fellows, and we have placed them at different partner universities, and they all have one vision in mind: to impact through education. To give you an example, we have the likes of Angela Houston Brown, who has achieved a remarkable 8 distinctions in the 2019 academic year. Angela is at UCT doing BSc. We also have Batetwa Mtetwa, who's a 3rd-year computer science student at UP. Batetwa is majoring in informatics, and his dream is to build an education system or platform that can be easily accessible to a child in the disadvantaged areas of South Africa to access education. Also, want to mention this one, we have Nothando Mafu, who's listening from Springs right now. But Nothando is from the first day that we met her. She said she wants to be the Minister of Education. She still maintains even today that she wants to be the Minister of Education. Nothando is doing her third year now at UP. She wants to teach LO and English, and her biggest dream is to write books that teach kids resilience and mental wellness. Obviously, there are many more examples I could give, but due to time, I'll just stop there. We do all of this with the conviction that in the not so distant future, in every corner of South Africa, in probably every school as well, there will be expert teachers, educational leaders, social entrepreneurs who will lead system change to achieve quality education for all learners. To be part of this vision, maybe you're listening and be like, hey, I want to be part of this. You can go onto our website and apply. Applications are currently open, but also say you're a teacher or a leader yourself and you have this superstar that you think this is the vision for them and they would do best, they would do great as a candidate fellow at Jakes Gerwel. You can also nominate them by going onto our website. That's the most about who Jakes Gerwel Fellowship is, and I hope you enjoy today's webinar. Thank you, Zolani, over to you.
Sure, thanks a lot for that, Mpho. I think you greatly encapsulated what Jakes Gerwel Fellowship does. And really the key cornerstones here around leadership development for educational leadership, specifically developing educational entrepreneurs, and also then developing expert teachers. And like Mpho said, the great goal really is to impact schools in South Africa and to transform the education system as we know it. Now, I understand that not everyone who's here today was able to join the previous two conversations that we had. So just to give you an idea of really the conversations that we had. So we had Armand, who's from Canada. We had Dudu Makari, we had Professor Jonathan Jansen, and we had Marge Brown on the first dialogue, who helped us really to navigate the conversation around educating in interesting times. And I like to say that this was really where we were conceptualizing the problem, and we had key outcomes from this conversation that were that, you know, South Africa has socioeconomic inequities that are manifesting within our education system, and that this COVID-19 epidemic may have not created inequalities, as Professor Jonathan Jansen said, but it sure did shine light on pre-existing social and structural inequalities that are also evident within our education system. The first dialogue also had an outcome around, you know, the psychosocial implications of the outbreak on learners and teachers, and what that really means for how we understand schooling and the way in which we conduct education for the near future and post, you know, and post COVID-19. But also from the conversation, you know, we saw that amongst attendees, there was an anticipation of negative effects on pass rates, especially amongst quintile 1 school, that this epidemic outbreak and in fact consequential schooling moratorium will have quite considerable consequences on the pass rates, especially at matric level. And people felt as though that this was an issue we ought to consider as we conceptualize what a post-COVID-19 strategy looks like. In our second conversation, we had a great panel that also assisted us to navigate the conversation around low-tech strategies that we can implement within education as we respond to COVID-19, but also as we plan for education. So key outcomes really also shine light on, you know, the inequitable access to data and devices as key barriers to online learning. People highlighted that, you know, there's an inequitable access to bandwidth, and this is something to consider as we start talking about things around online learning and the introduction of technology within the classroom. Teacher training and parental involvement were identified as key ingredients to effective home-based learning. The third output was that there was a realization of a need for inclusive online learning. Now, what this means really is the idea that as we move towards online learning and other platforms, we should consider the reality that we're living in a country where not everyone has access to bandwidth, where not everyone has access to devices, but also quite importantly, that the inequalities are quite evident at a schooling level as well, where some schools have been able to continue with teaching during the epidemic outbreak and subsequent lockdown, and some schools haven't been able to continue teaching. And this obviously has implications then on how we plan for the future. Now, what we're doing today really is shifting the focus a bit from conceptualizing the problem. And I know people who are joining us for the first time today may be frustrated thinking, oh my goodness, this conversation is really an elitist conversation where considerations aren't made to the realities of the many in the country. The idea here really is to work out a scenario to say, with the absence of limitations, what could we achieve with high-tech strategies for education? What is available there? And if we were able to make it available to everyone, what impact could we anticipate for the education system? Now, we still are acknowledging that there are multiple realities and that, technological interventions should pay attention to the multiple realities that people live in and the multiple realities of schools in South Africa. To help us navigate through this conversation, we have a wonderful panel that I'll introduce. And the first is Chinezi Chijioke, who's also a member of our board at Jakes Gerwel. Welcome, Chinezi. Chinezi is also the founder and CEO of Nova Pioneer, and he'll tell you in a bit what they do. We also have, Wendy wasn't able to join us today. So we have Prof. Sarah Gravett from the University of Johannesburg. She's the Executive Dean of the School of Education at UJ. We welcome Prof. Sarah. Prof. Sarah holds a PhD in education, and I have high hopes on the insights that she's bringing in today's conversation. We also have Mark Horner, who's the CEO of Siyavula Education. Mark also holds a PhD from the University of Cape Town in physics. So welcome, Mark, and we're excited to have you today. We have Sisonke Kumalo, who is the editor-in-chief of the Journal for Decolonizing Disciplines at the University of Pretoria. Kumalo will be a respondent in today's conversation, really providing us with great insights of what transpired and the sort of generative content of today's conversation. So we're truly excited to have our panel to help us navigate this conversation. So what we're here today for really is a response to the global epidemic that has resulted to the subsequent closure of more than 190 of schools in more than 190 countries globally, right? We understand that the COVID-19 lockdowns in most countries has resulted to a schooling moratorium, but also in some contexts, schooling has continued. We are here because we ought to devise a response not only for this epidemic, but to prepare our education system for future epidemics, because we understand that we are most likely to have another outbreak. We're also here because we care about the development of teachers, and we care about the improvement of learning outcomes within South African schools, but also within the African context in general, really. But also, quite importantly, we're here today because all of a sudden, the COVID-19 epidemic has forced us to adjust into what people call the fourth industrial revolution. I saw online a question asking, so what helped your company to adjust better to the fourth industrial revolution? And people tried to give multiple answers, and the correct answer was COVID-19. So it wasn't the CEO that helped and developed the strategy. It wasn't the smart IT people that helped and developed the strategy, but it was an epidemic outbreak that forced companies, that forced entities, and that forced societies to adjust into a new normal. So we are here because we don't want to be left behind in this new normal, but we're also here because we're trying to understand what this new normal means for us. So the structure that we're going to follow then is very similar to the structure we followed in previous conversations. We're going to be here together for the next 2 hours. So please prepare yourself psychologically to be sitting. I like to say that in as much as 2 hours sounds, and you may think it's going to feel like a lot, you're likely to have resentment for me at the end, because I wouldn't have answered all your questions and I wouldn't have given you as much time to actually divulge in the conversation. So we'll also be taking questions and answers through a platform called Mentimeter. This is an online engagement tool. So you go to www.menti.com, www.menti.com. This is where we'll be taking questions. So if you have a burning question, it will go onto Mentimeter and there will be a prompt as we go with the conversation. I'm sure if you've gone to the website now, it's probably asking you for a code. The code for today's conversation is 20659. 20659. The code is on your screen. It's quite small. So if you need to squint, please do so. The code, I repeat, is 20659. There'll also be engagement through social media. My colleagues will be monitoring the Twitter account. So if there are any questions that are coming on Twitter, we're also monitoring that. But also it's a space for you to really post ideas as they come through. If you see or hear a cool quote from one of the speakers, Twitter is your go-to. Just post it and tag us at JG Fellowship. Our Twitter handle is JG Fellowship. The hashtag we'll be using today is JGF Webinar. JGF Webinar is the hashtag we are using. My colleague Sihle is also here today again. He'll be paying attention to the Q&A section of the Zoom platform. So he'll be monitoring if there are any other technical questions that people have. He'll try and answer and attend to those as we go with the conversation. So I want us to now test our comfortability with Mentimeter before we go on to the conversation. Here's a question there. Try and answer it using the code you see on your screen, 20659. 20659. We have two cool dudes here. Who's cooler between the two dudes? Actually, I could be misgendering them. It's likely that they're not even dudes. They could be non-binary. They could be anything else. So let me try and not gender them. The code is 20659. I'm not seeing responses on my side. Is it because people are struggling to get onto Mentimeter, or is it because of something else? Okay, now I'm starting to see responses. It looks like Bradogo is winning. Is there a selection bias here where people who are registering for this webinar are dog lovers? Because the difference is quite significant. Okay, it looks like Bradog is winning. The next question is, which organizations are here? Imfundo Consulting is in the house. Groteskir High School, we see you. We see you, Isasa. Kanyisa, welcome. UWC is in the house. Weinberg Girls, welcome. Okay, we seem to be getting a hang of this. The next question is, what is your role within education? What is your role within education? Teachers are winning. We're seeing school teachers winning. Okay, educational leaders are also fighting for their chance. Interest groups are also getting a piece of the pie. I see we have a few academics. People in student support are also in the house. Educational leaders are by far the majority, followed by school teachers. Okay. And then the other question is, did you attend any of our previous dialogues? Okay, we're seeing a majority who've attended. So everything I was explaining, you already knew about it. And we're seeing we've got new people who've joined us. That's great. And then you can answer this question as I go along then to set the context for the speakers. What questions are you currently sitting with at the moment? Any burning questions that you think you would want the speakers to address? Anything that speaks to you in particular that you're thinking, when we're discussing high-tech strategies to education, this is something we should not leave out in today's conversation. But as we wait for that, as we wait for the feedback on that, I want to put you on the spot, Chinezi. I think you're an easy target right now. So I'm going to start with you. Really, I mean, we were discussing high-tech strategies, right? And Nova Pioneer is identified as a, a Pan-African schooling franchise that has innovative curricula. And so I want you to maybe take your time to introduce to us, what Nova Pioneer is and what you do. And I'm giving you about 3 minutes to just do that introduction.
Sure, and thank you, Zolani, and good morning to everyone, and thanks to the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship team for your leadership throughout this. Clearly, the repeat attendance at these is demonstrative of the value of the impact these are having. So thanks for leading us. Very briefly on the intro, and then just maybe a word on the topic, or Zolani, you can tell me if we just stick with the intro. Nova Pioneer is a schools group. Again, we operate schools in South Africa and in Kenya at this point, East Africa, with a mission to develop innovators and leaders who can shape the future and shape what we call the African century ahead. And to do that, we develop an educational program, or we offer an educational program that is really designed to support what's called a vision of a Noveneer. And the vision of a Noveneer is characterized by three C's, we call them. So the first is a set of character principles that are pretty specifically defined to try to underpin long-term success and contribution. The second are a set of capabilities, both deep academic mastery and a collaborative problem-solving set of capabilities. And the third is connection, trying to connect young developing innovators and leaders across to their communities and across communities, so that they collectively have more impact and power and influence than they would individually. Nova Pioneer, therefore, as part of that, a big part of, we're going to talk about technology in a second. Clearly, tech is a big part of our offering, and part of how integrated into kind of learning, the learning that our students and young Noveneers experience. Now, given to one point when Zolani mentioned, sort of this is we're talking a high tech sort of framing to this discussion. Nova Pioneer certainly, in context, I think is privileged in many ways. We're certainly not an elite institution in the sense of elitely priced. We are our mission is to try to make accessible the kind of learning I've just described, and so our sort of fee ranges are sort of what we call mid to upper mid fee ranges in both Kenya and in South Africa. And then maybe just briefly framing up quickly how we are thinking about this topic, and then I'll sort of pause to let the discussion go on. I think we are thinking about this sort of in three phases, right? The impact of COVID and the pandemic on learning and on learning, essentially in three phases. The first has been this phase of immediate pivots into distance learning, and that's been sort of I think the focus for every school over the past month has really been how to really pivot to support continued and enriched and high quality learning and continued learning for all our students at every age level. We have students as young as 3 months all the way to 19 years old, and so that's the first phase of this, is the immediate pivot to be able to do really supported distance learning. The second, I think, phase is one we are about to all move into, and it'll be different across countries, but particularly in South Africa, I think move into, which is going to be a highly differentiated and shifting phase in which just dexterity is going to be really important, and a new kind of dexterity where some grades may go back to school and other grades may not, or a particular school has to close or grade has to shut down, or has to go at a distance, I should say, for 2 to 4 weeks at a time. Or you have to have different strategies for differentiating across different periods when the pandemic may spike and the pandemic may drop, and so you may have different phases of closure and opening. And the ability as schools and educators to be able to pivot and do more than one, operate in more than one way at the same time is probably going to be something we're going to have to develop and adapt to if we're going to be able to support all our children to learn over the next several months. And then I think there's phase 3 ahead of us, which is that's sort of how this evolves fundamentally what we do in classrooms and at schools. And I think that's sort of how do we adapt to, one, the greater comfort and familiarity that families and students will have with distance learning, the greater the skills we are all developing and how to provide that. And I think a differentiation of preferences. I think you'll find a lot of both educators and students who will have some preference, who will say, some will find this is actually, a small number will find, I think this actually worked quite well, but it'll be a growth in the number of folks who actually find this works well. And then a bunch of folks who say, I can't wait to get back to being in physical proximity and on campus with my teachers and my peers. And so across those 3 phases are going to require different kinds of innovations from all of the educators, including ourselves. But the phase we're in right now has been the pivots. And I think the challenge we've been able to really focus on is how do we continue to support the kind of learning I described, which is sort of developing young innovators and leaders with a very quick pivot in a short amount of time, so that day one, you're able to support every child across every grade and every school in Nova Pioneer in that. And that's been sort of the focus. The last thing I'll say about that is it's obviously been a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us. So we started to try to do a few things well rather than try to do too much and then get better. That's sort of our first principle, was do fewer things well and then try to get better. And then the second thing is that we were really had two things. We've had 2 things going for us that have been very fortunate. And this is probably our greatest privilege in this is we have a central learning design team, essentially a curriculum development team that is able to really help us pivot and provide well thought out curriculum resources and learning resources for children that enable them to be and that support parents particularly in being able to support continued learning, and across a range of different tech access. We have a wide diversity. We have we don't have the full diversity of our countries, but we certainly have a wide diversity of certainly no tech, no device, but with some data access, to all the way to I've got the ability to stream Zoom for 4 hours in a day, and having to solving for that has been really enabled by having this learning design team. So that was a key point of focus. And the second was just the familiarity our students had with and have had with learning with tech and using tech from certainly from grade R and above, but it has just made the pivot easier, and having sort of spent a lot of time with students building routine and comfort and self-didactic skills, so that tries to support it makes it an easier transition, though certainly not without pain. It's I think not without failures, but an easier transition to be able to do that over the course of the initial pivots. So 3 phases. We're still in the first one, and I can think a couple things we've had going for us, though lots of failures. Happy to share those too. If you
Sure. Thanks, Chinezi. I think you've gone into a lot of depth than I had anticipated. Thank you for that. I think you've sort of given a great idea of what Nova Pioneer. And now I want to go to Mark. Mark, you from Siyavula, and I kind of want you to explain this in context, bearing in mind. So one of the questions that came from the audience in terms of what their curiosity is for today's conversation is around how we bring tech to to low quintile schools, right? To quintile 1 schools and schools in rural communities. And I understand Siyavula is, best placed to speak about this. So tell us more about Siyavula and try to see if you can respond to that question.
All right. Good morning, Zolani. Good morning, everybody. I see quite a few names on the participants list that look quite familiar. I'm not sure if it's all the people I know, but I think I haven't really been in contact with a lot of people this year. It's been a bit of a crazy year. So hello to everybody I haven't spoken to in a while. Zolani, would it be possible for me to share my screen? Or is that going to be
No, it should be.
Yeah, I can click on the button. Right. Can I do that quickly?
Yes, you've got right.
Well, let's try it out.
Sure.
Okay. then I'm going to switch to, hopefully you'll see some standard slides from Siavula. So Zolani, can you just confirm that they've come up and that you can see them?
I would say hide your WhatsApp tab.
Okay. Can you see my whole screen, not just the slides?
You've got
Okay.
two screens.
Oh, okay. It's a bit, can we get the, right. Let me see if I can get the share to come up properly. Sorry, application window. Ah, sorry. There we go. I'm normally a Google Hangouts person. All right. Okay, now can you just see the slides? Hopefully it's also bigger and clearer then. Zolani, can you see them?
You've got a note there, reuse. Is that supposed to be there?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
But it should be part of a broader picture. All right, no. So okay. If you see reuse, remix, revise, then we're on the right slide, but it needs a little bit of context. So sorry for the teething problems. I didn't practice this yesterday with Zolani, so it's all my fault. Apologies for that. I'll just speak faster to make up the time. So as said, I'm Mark Horner. I'm the CEO of Siavula Education. We are an education technology company based in Cape Town. And Zolani mentioned that we were best placed. I don't know if I'm best placed to say that much, but I definitely will have some opinions and some thoughts on how we reach people across the country. So what Siavula is focused on initially was the access to educational content. And what we did was we focused on trying to produce openly licensed textbooks that allow people to copy them. The argument being that if we can produce textbooks that anyone can copy, the supply chain can be handled by anybody else, and that can reduce the costs. We've done that, and in partnership with the Department of Basic Education and many funders, a small catalog of titles has been reviewed, endorsed, and some of them have been printed for all the schools in the country. So grade 4, 5, and 6 natural sciences, and our grade 10 and 11 maths and physical sciences textbooks. Those books are on an open license, so anyone is allowed to reuse them, remix them, make changes, revise them, adapt them, redistribute them, and you retain your copyright in doing so. So that's the revise, remix, redistribute, reuse, etc. on the side. So we're quite proud of the fact that millions of copies of these openly licensed textbooks have actually been printed and distributed within the country. And one of the issues that we had, and probably still have, but that was front and center about 10 years ago, was the lack of textbooks in the country. And so this was directly in response to that. And what we tried to do in that process is make sure that those books are available. So just focusing on our grade 10, 11, and 12 books, that those books are as accessible as possible. And we did that a few ways. We made sure that the files that are available for print are available. Online, web-based PDFs, lower resolution PDFs are available, but also that those books can be read on a website that is feature phone friendly, as you can see on the left, and there's EPUBs, etc., so that the modern web browsers can read them. So in that process, what we've tried to do is make sure that we can use technology, because we use technology behind the scenes to make sure that we can produce a textbook far more efficiently than some of the other traditional publishing pipelines might be able to, and that we can push that content more effectively out to all of those different channels simultaneously. So at Siavula, when we write a book, we don't have to send it off to someone to convert to PDF or to EPUB or to a web version. We make all of those versions in one go. So we've developed initially technology that enables us, for the single cost of production, to produce a book and push it out in all of these different output formats. And so that is a direct response to trying to say, how can technology make it far more efficient and reduce the cost of getting educational content out to people over many different channels? And if the content is then congruent, we make giving more people access to that. And so that was the first thing that Siavula did, and I think probably most people know us for, is just the production of open educational resources. And our philosophy there is that the teachers should be able to have access to content that they can adapt for their specific classroom context, so that the classroom context and the teacher's context is one that has more flexibility to adapt to learners' specific needs, which are very much context dependent. It's quite simply, one textbook doesn't suit all contexts, certainly not in South Africa, certainly not anywhere else in the world. So that's just on the textbook side. And then as a technology company, we said, what's the optimal thing we can do to complement a textbook? You know, have we, perhaps we've made some strides towards solving the textbook access problem.
Sorry,
yes.
can I, we only seeing 50% of your screen. The rest is black, and I'm seeing now that there's actually something underneath. I'm not sure if those are laptops you were trying to show, but it's black, so we can't see.
Oh, they're animated. Okay. Okay. Then what I will do is I'll switch to, I don't have a non-animated version. Okay. Ha. That's,
maybe you could just explain.
Sure. No. So that I will. So what we did was we've developed a service that allows us to generate questions. So essentially, I'll go to the next one. We've got a system that allows us to generate questions that we've built for maths, physics, and chemistry. And then those questions can be marked. And they also generate an explanatory solution. So in the small screenshot on the right, you can see something of the explanatory solution. And this is where the high-tech component fits into it. So we've built questions as software packages that can generate unlimited versions of themselves. They can mark responses in terms of symbolic marking, so functions, spectroscopic notations, chemical reactions, etc. And then the model solution for the exact version of the question that the student saw is generated and given to them. And this sits in the cloud. So we've got this database of what are called generative question items, and they can do self-marking and they can generate solutions. And we have a team working on that, and that database gets bigger essentially every day. The rate fluctuates, but that's kind of one of our major pursuits, is to continuously expand that database of generative question items. And the reason we built that is we want to make sure that learners can practice problems when aligned with their textbook, where they acquire component skills, then practice problems that integrate multiple versions, combinations of component skills, apply those to different contexts, and continue doing that until they achieve mastery. That's practice for mastery in a maths and science context. And so we've been building out all the questions you need for that, and making sure that when a learner does a problem, they get immediate feedback. We've built a system which learns about what the learner is getting right or wrong, so it gives them questions at their specific level. And then because we've got generative question items, we can give them essentially unlimited questions on any topic. And then there's some nuances in the sequencing to try to make sure that learners retain the information in the long term. So revising questions you get wrong more frequently, etc. And so we've built an adaptive system that's in the cloud that does all of that. Students can just log in, they can choose a topic from the curriculum to practice. The system generates questions for them. They work on paper and they type in answers, we mark it, we give them a solution, and it all sits in the cloud, and they can access this on any device. So essentially anybody with any device anywhere that can connect to the web can use Siavula's practice service. So essentially the really high-tech stuff we've put in the cloud, and all we ask to minimize the barrier to access. So it's a technology solution. There is a barrier to access, but to minimize that barrier to access, we focus on the lowest end possible device. So we're giving the learner the question. We expect them to work on paper. It's actually been shown that writing out notes and things on paper is more effective than typing on a laptop or something like that. So it's actually a good learning experience. And then we give them an immediate solution that they can compare. So don't have to go to class the next day to find out if they went right or wrong, etc. So far, I think we were included on a Telkom list last week, but I don't have a slide, sorry. But so it's 0 rated on Vodacom, MTN, and I believe now Telkom. I haven't verified that myself. And so if we cater for the lowest end device for the consumer of the content, and we can get it zero rated on the networks, we're actually lowering that barrier to high-tech solutions, adaptive machine learning algorithms. But if you've got a Nokia 5110, you could still benefit from that same technology, that service. So we want to be very pragmatic. We want to reach people where they are. We want to reach as many people as possible, but we want to make sure that we use the latest technology to give them the best possible learning experience we can. And then I'm just going to talk about some of the stats, just so you know. We've been doing this for sort of 8 years. We've been continuously building it up.
Sorry, Mark?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just gonna break you there. I think you provided a great context of, you know, what it is that you guys do. I think what we can arrange is maybe for you to share some of the slides or the slide deck with people afterwards.
Okay.
I'm just conscious of time, but
Sure.
thank you so much. I think this really provides a great idea around, you know, what solutions are there, because one of the things that people were asking was around the exact applications that they can use to facilitate learning in a classroom, but also applications that they can use for other purposes. So it's great that you are able to share that with us. Now, I want to move on to Professor Sarah. I think I want you to maybe tell us a bit about, you know, what the School of Education at UJ is doing, but primarily your partnership with MIT and what that looks like, and what you see this conversation to be about essentially.
Thank you, and good day to everybody. Let me first start maybe about my own research interest, because I also think that's one of the reasons that I was requested to be part of this panel. I'm most certainly not a high-tech education expert, and I made that very clear from the very onset. But my research interest for many years has been on learning, understanding the processes of learning, the nature of learning, and the cognitive architecture of human beings. And my view has also always been that teachers and people who are working in education, whether you are somebody who's designing learning environments, must have a very, very strong knowledge base in relation to what learning is and the nature of learning and human cognitive architecture. I've seen too many text strategies where the technology is the focus instead of whether the technology is suitable to really facilitate deep learning and not surface learning. Not to focus mainly on information, but on grappling with core concepts, core ideas in a specific field of study. So I am pro-tech, and colleagues at the Faculty of Education will tell you that we put in a lot of effort with our student teachers to ensure that they understand how to use ICTs in education optimally. And I must also say I have some amazing colleagues in the Faculty of Education who's really doing excellent work with our student teachers and with our academic staff to enable the use of ICTs and technology in education optimally. But I am simultaneously a skeptic, because many of the digital teaching resources that are available have actually not done much to revolutionize learning environments. And my sense is it's because the technology is foregrounded instead of the learning. And then something else just that I would like to foreground in general is when I'm asked about innovation in education, I will always ask innovation for what purpose? And the same also then with high-tech strategies. High-tech strategies for what purpose and in what context? Because I truly believe that any technology, any strategy must be evaluated with a yardstick of contextual relevance and must have a very strong educational pedagogical purpose. Also, some of you might have read the very interesting book of, and let me just get his name right, Yong Zhao, who wrote about what works might actually hurt. And that's an excellent book, because he says that when one looks at the effectiveness of an educational intervention, which one should not only looking at does it work, but also whether the result is desirable, because many things that work are not necessarily desirable. And he makes the case that, as I said, what may work may also hurt, and therefore one always needs to look at any educational innovations, any educational strategies in this wider context of purpose and of whether it is desirable, the outcome that one wants. Yeah, Zolani, you said I should also briefly talk about our work with MIT. I just need to give the bigger picture. Apart from my interest in learning and also initial teacher education, lots of my research has been in this field. We have also recently embarked on a research with the National Education Collaboration Trust in partnership with them, called the Sandbox Project. And this Sandbox Project focuses on teaching and learning in the 21st century, or how to infuse competencies for a changing world in teaching in schools. Regrettably, we can't continue at the moment with the research due to the situation in South Africa. But the important focus also in this research is that we don't see so-called 21st century competencies as separate, as a skill, that knowledge is not important. We take as point of departure that you infuse these competencies for a changing world in the curriculum and through the way that you teach. Now, one of our partners in this project is also MIT. So we work with MIT via the National Education Collaboration Trust Sandbox Project, but also as UJ, we have a collaboration with MIT. And here the focus is specifically on creative learning. So we are doing research with children in our Funda Ujabule school, the school that is situated on our Soweto campus. This research has just actually started with a PhD student, Linfet Molawodi, on using creative coding or Scratch. Now, the important thing for me is we are not using coding for the sake of coding, or teaching coding for the sake of coding, but that Scratch enables creative learning, and that is the focus. And we are also doing the same then with student teachers. So this project is on its way, and it's very exciting. Then the last thing, you know, the focus is high tech, but sometimes high tech is not necessarily the way to go. Tinkering projects that require children to make things, doing tinkering, etc., could actually be low tech, could also be high tech, and could be amazing in helping children developing also, as I said, these competencies that we need for a changing world.
Sure. So thanks a lot, Prof. Gravitt. I think you you encapsulate this subject quite nicely in terms of saying, listen, perhaps there's a much bigger picture here that we should be exploring, rather than looking at whether or not tech works, but that, you know, sometimes what works isn't always good. And I think, you know, the sentiments you're sharing are very much similar. I'm seeing Wendy has joined us. Welcome, Wendy. We're really happy to have you. Just for a brief introduction, Wendy is an educational expert, and last year she received a national teaching award. So we're really happy to have you here, Wendy. And I think as I was listening to Sarah speaking, all I could hear was, you know, the meme that was on your position statement saying technology cannot replace teachers. And I kind of want you to move then towards, you know, linking to what Sarah was talking about, but talking more to this idea of digital citizenship, what it means, how we can foster it. Is it something we should be concerning ourselves with? Yeah, can you speak mainly to that?
Thank you for having me, and hello everybody. Yes, digital citizenship. So teachers have been thrown by the COVID virus into the deep end, many of them. Just to give you some background, schools in general here in the Western Cape have been trying to roll out this e-learning, and we've been trying to train teachers and get kids on board with various programs, and it's been very, very slow for a number of different reasons. And then the COVID virus came along, and everybody was scrambling. And so just a couple of takes from that, what I've been noticing is that educators, having been thrown into the deep end, have been able to embrace the technology as best they can, to make learning and teaching happen as best they can, from a number of platforms using things like Google, Teams, to even just teaching via WhatsApp. I've seen some excellent lessons being done just via the WhatsApp platform, with small little videos and pictures being taken of solutions and PDFs being shared. So teachers have really embraced trying to reach our learners in whichever possible way that we can. Teachers that were resistant to digital learning and learning any type of new app have had to come on board, and this has forced them to learn. And I've been really, really amazed at what teachers are doing. So just here in the Western Cape, we have the Cape Teachers Learning Institute, which does courses for teachers. And they opened up a course on Tuesday evening at 9:30, how to use WhatsApp to teach. Within 50 minutes, they had got 100 participants, and they had to close the registration. So it just shows the hunger that teachers want to learn. And I must agree, with UJ in terms of what we are doing. So now teachers are teaching using various digital platforms, whatever it may be. But the pedagogy going around it is obviously missing, because now it's just emergency teaching. That's what we're doing. This is crisis teaching. This is not online teaching, and it's not distance teaching, and it's not homeschooling. It is crisis teaching that we are doing to see what we can do to put a plaster over a gunshot wound. That is what is happening at the moment. So in terms of digital citizenship, what I've noticed with the learners that I'm teaching and across the various platforms that I assist with, is that learners, especially your senior learners, are very, very stressed, and they want to learn. So they are doing whatever they can to use whatever online platforms are available. So the Siavula platform is being used extensively. And then we can even go less high tech to the radio. I got a message from one of my learners when I was trying to Zoom them. We're watching the TV show now on maths, don't disturb us with your Zoom lesson right now. So they are engaging in whatever platform they can, because they understand they've got to try, especially the matrics, try and get into university and do all of those type of things. Digital citizenship is a big issue. So when you're teaching in Zoom, especially with the juniors, you might get a few grade 9s drawing penises on your whiteboard and things like that. So those lessons have to be learned and have to be taught to our learners. And I know within the WCED, the life orientation curriculum has just added a whole section on digital citizenship, which will be rolled out to the learners. And it's part of the Google, or it's in collaboration with the Google Digital Citizen program that they have. So that will be taught to learners, and hopefully learners will be able to get on board with that. But as I said, just to conclude, at this point in time, we are just doing whatever we can with whatever technology we are able to use in whichever situation we can. So it's a lot of hit and miss at the moment.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Wendy. I think I like your insights on how this is crisis management more than it is anything. So it's crisis teaching, and we're responding to a situation that we're finding ourselves. But you're talking to a couple of things there that bring me to, you know, what I see to be quite an important question to also then ground this conversation around the idea of training, because you're talking, you know, around the necessity for teaching digital citizenship, because there's this presumption that if you throw devices at people and if you give them access to bandwidth, and, you know, learners will somehow be responsible. And somehow teachers will feel a sense of ownership of the material, and that they'll feel that they are empowered to make use of this, and, you know, productively so to add. So you talk about this idea of training, and you mentioned, you know, how if you throw devices without, you know, some pedagogical, you know, content training, for example, in terms of what you actually use technology for. So the question I want to ask really is, where do you see technology playing quite a significant role then in terms of the education system? Where do you see the role of tech being? Because South Africa is faced with a crisis of low literacy and numeracy rates. And so in as much as we find ourselves in crisis, there's also the reality that crisis does allow us to innovate and think quite strategically about what systems should look like in the near future. At least it forces us to into an innovation space. Some of the solutions we come up with now are likely to have long-term effects and quite positive effects. So the question then is, where can we, or how do we use technology within education then to best position ourselves in addressing some of these issues around low literacy rates and low numeracy rates? And I want to come back to you, Chinezi, and see what your insights are on this.
Yeah, no, thanks, Zolani. Two of the things that Professor Gravitt and Wendy said, I think really anchor this well, which is like, what's the learning experience you're trying to create? And then what's the role that technology plays in enabling that? And I want to get a little practical with that, because I think there's a tremendous amount of, what Wendy is saying, tremendous amount of invention that's being bred out of the necessity of the fact that our students and our teachers cannot be physically together, and we need to support our students to continue to learn, and that's breeding a tremendous amount of just inventiveness by students, by teachers, and by families, right? Because we're put in this tremendously new and, for many of us, challenging position. Now, I think, so if we think about then what learning are we trying to create, and we're trying to create certainly the kind of mastery in the areas or learning in the areas you mentioned, plus if we're trying to enrich that even more, how do we think about it? So a couple of things that I think we want to think about is we want to first develop, and this sort of when we thought about our learning design objectives and how we support this part is first thing we wanted to try to get was building some sense of routine and even stronger ownership for students around, and for families around, what the week looks like. And that's not a tech solution besides just creating a little bit of a structure for the week, right? Then you want to create opportunities for students to actually get feedback and be able to share their work and get feedback. Now, tech can enable that, right? So you can actually get, whether you use programs that are provide immediate assessments, whether it's there are a bunch of online programs. We happen to use things like Reading A to Z, Mathletics. Siavula is a great example of a program that can support that. Or feedback from teachers for their students' work. We've had, when we do some more enriched projects, or we've given opportunities for students, or we've created part of the learning opportunities, for students at home, to create a set of projects, document their work. And here's where tech, if you have it, can really support it, because students can do a lot of self-documentation of their work, reflection on work, share that across classrooms. And so things that we do in our school normally around exploration and project work and the sharing of the exhibition of work, we're having to do that, but we do it through tech, right? Whether we're sharing that with other students, are sharing that with each other through Google Classroom, or presenting that in Zoom. So the tech enables a structure, because teachers and students able to have a touch points that structure the day, able to provide feedback on the work, and then able to do some more enriched activities. And then even when we further activity, there are new opportunities that this has actually pushed us to, we've worked with or not done enough of in our learning, is that third C I talked about, just connection. We want to create, students are living and learning, and then we had because of being at a distance. And so, for example, having students, we had a set of students do stepping across, be able to bring real world practitioners or leaders to be able to provide feedback to their work. Now that is actually richer learning in that sense that was happening and more frequently than was happening prior to the necessity of figuring out how to actually try to facilitate this kind of learning at a distance. And so in each of those examples, whether it's the getting a lot of practice in sort of fun core skills, whether it's feedback, again, students getting feedback on their work, whether it's structuring the day, or whether it is more enriched activities like self-documented projects and these collaborative conferences that are addressing real current issues. Each of those has a clear learning intention, a clear outcome intention, and tech has been part of the platform, or part of the enabler to making that possible. And without that tech, without any of that tech, clearly it'd be much harder for us to solve for any of those in this context. But we're not doing it for the purpose of being, technology driven.
Oh, thanks, Chinezi. A couple of insights then from you, because I think you've spoken quite eloquently to what we can use tech for to have an enriched learning environment within classrooms. And I would imagine that ties into the kind of learning experience that we ought to create. You're drawing examples around bringing real life practitioners and tying them with students, and the essence of providing feedback to students and how tech can facilitate that. And I think that speaks quite largely to the idea of, tech as a facilitator within a learning environment, more than tech it being the teacher, right? And I think that ties nicely to then your insights, Sarah. One of the questions that came, or sorry, not a question actually, one of the things that were raised in the previous slide was that people see teacher training and development as an important, ingredient for improving learning outcomes in South Africa. So we've got all the cool tech that we can use to facilitate a learning environment. Everyone has great access, and access isn't a challenge, but people are still seeing the essence of teacher training in, improving learning outcomes because of at the core of it all, we are trying to develop a type of citizen, and unfortunately or fortunately, we do measure this by learning outcomes. So we pay attention to matric results, we pay attention to performance, at ECD, primary school level, etc. So people are seeing the essence then of teacher training as we incorporate tech. What are your insights on that?
Yeah, Zolani, Professor Gravitt, good, okay.
Yeah, could I maybe just first say, Wendy, thank you so much for raising the issue that we are not busy at the moment with doing online teaching, or, I see all sorts of terms being thrown around. It is emergency teaching. It is emergency teaching at a distance, or emergency teaching, remote emergency teaching, and that's important to understand. So even though I believe, as I also said, some of you saw some of you indicating that the crisis always has a gift, and that one could learn a lot from what is happening at the moment in relation to also how to use technology to support learning. And we should capture these learnings, because we should ensure that they are not lost for us going forward. However, one should also be careful at this stage about the snake oil solutions that we see, and people who are currently pushing their own solutions seeing this as an opportunity to do that. Just to reiterate, as I said before, technology is a tool. Technology is there to support the learning and to help us learning. It's not an end in itself, but that's an aside. About teacher education, I do think the role of teacher education is to prepare teachers for a lifelong career. Now that is challenging to do, because we need to do two things simultaneously. On the one hand, we need to prepare our teachers to go into the schools that are functioning at the moment, or not functioning, as seems what is happening now. So for the current context, but we can't only teach our students for the current context, because if we do that and the crisis happens, or the context changes, or the curriculum changes, then one has teachers who simply can't cope. And I think this crisis showed us that the importance of having teachers who are flexible. And what does that mean? It means teachers who have, as I basically suggested before, a deeper understanding of how context impacts education, and also an understanding of learning. Now, if I think, for instance, about context, the importance of context, I think all teacher education institutions should spend a lot of time focusing on what is the impact of poverty on education, and how does one deal with that. And then, at the moment, in this fast-changing world in which technology is becoming increasingly pervasive, what is the impact of technology on human beings and on education, and how do we best use the affordances of technology to help us to move teaching and learning forward? And that is also a strong focus that we have in the Faculty of Education, to prepare the teachers to understand the affordances of technology, always with a view of how this technology can be used optimally to support learning.
Thanks a lot, Prof. Graffit. I like the sort of reminder there that, you know, we are dealing with human beings, and, you know, there are consequences or implications that are imposed by the situation we're finding ourselves. And the idea that as we train teachers, we should train them for the schools that are, but also go beyond then, beyond, you know, what is to say, what could be. And I think you're speaking towards a question that has been asked by the audience. And I think this question was directed to you, Wendy. The person specifically put your name on the question to say, Wendy, how do we, how do you think we can take this crisis teaching and implement it greatly then on, how we approach learning in the future? So I suppose the question is around, what do you think the effects of this crisis teaching that is happening now are going to be on pedagogy in the near future? What kind of pedagogy can we anticipate as a consequence of the situation that we are finding ourselves in? So the exact implications that you think are there for pedagogy as a result of this.
Well, I'm hoping that through this crisis teaching and educators being forced to learn a bit more about technology, and learners and parents getting on board as well in a greater way, will get us to revamp the way we teach. Because at the moment, we teach content, we teach learners to pass an exam. So I'm hoping that now that we've got all these tools available to us, we can do a bit more teaching that allows more deeper learning. You can start getting the critical thinking skills going. For example, implementing project-based learning. So we're going back to schools now, hopefully, in the next couple of weeks. So we'll see what happens on Monday when the minister tells us. We've got a shortened time. We've got teachers are under pressure to finish syllabuses. But why do we need to finish the syllabus? Why can't this, all these skills and tools we've learned allow us to do project-based learning, where we can allow the learner to engage more with the critical thinking skills rather than with the content in about 13 different subjects that you have in the primary school. We can merge 13 subjects into 3 or 4 subjects, which is basically literacy and numeracy, and work around those in big projects using the technology that we have now and the tools that we've just acquired. I also see your previous question you were talking about, which links to the pedagogy, is we have a number of schools which underperform for various reasons. Educators are not present, are not skilled, classes are very big, learners are absent, one half of the learners are there one day, the other half are there the next day, and we all know the issues. But hopefully now that we've embraced this ICT type of technology, we can now start reaching those classrooms through streaming. And I know that there's some talks, and I know the WCD is busy looking at this, of streaming one classroom to another classroom, to another school. Now, there's lots of issues about timetabling, and I think we must stop looking at the problems and trying to find solutions for these problems. So you could have an expert teacher, if you can call them that, or an experienced teacher, teaching their class, whatever topic and subject, and then this lesson gets streamed, like we're doing now, from our homes to another classroom. It's not ideal. I do believe we need to have teacher interaction. There needs to be that human connection with a learner to assist the learner to learn. Because what we've noticed is some schools are doing wonderful online lessons, but if the learner doesn't click into the lesson, it's basically wasted. And I mean, that happens in your classroom anyway. We mustn't look at all these things and think they're new. In any classroom, 10% of the learners are not learning anything. They're doing their own thing. And that is normal. So online, it's probably more, but there are learners who are doing nothing, and that is normal. And we need to deal with that. But this will definitely improve your literacy and numeracy. Because if we can take lessons from one classroom to another. If we can video these lessons, some of the learners have been saying to me what they appreciate about these online lessons at the moment, or whatever you want to call them, is that they can go back and they can replay something. They can watch it again. They can do it at their own pace. They can do it in their own time, when they have time, when things are not so pressured. They can go back and relearn the work. So I do think it's going to help us to improve education across the whole of South Africa if implemented with the correct pedagogy.
Sure. Thanks a lot for that. I think towards the end there, you were starting to talk about around, some of the strategies that can be implemented to also improve, learner concentration, etc. And you're starting to use, to speak more towards the role of technology than in not just facilitating learning, but to facilitate learners' experiences of learning as well. And, the kind of responses that we get from learners. You're mentioning issues around learners not concentrating in class. The teacher is there teaching, but there's little concentration. And you're speaking around the issue of live streaming lessons, for example. And, in the previous slide, I could see that people were asking critical questions, which we were also asking in the first dialogue around access to data, the issue of bandwidth. And it's a key challenge and continues to be a challenge, and it seemingly becomes a common theme and almost as anticipated that, people will be curious then, how do you make access to data not a barrier anymore to online learning and whatever platforms that we want to use. But also on the screen right now, in the absence of limitations, people are seeing that technology could play a role in addressing inequitable access to quality education, right? And I think that's one of the things we often overlook. We look at the limitations and think, oh my God, this is terrible, and we don't know what to do. But, the audience seems to believe that technology can play a role in addressing the inequalities that we've been speaking about. So perhaps there's, an avenue there to explore then, making sure that technology is used to the best effect. But now, another thing that is also appearing to be above average from the screen is this issue of parental involvement. And we haven't spoken much about it so far. With the low-tech strategies, one of the key things that came up is the reality that in as much as we can say parents should be involved in the learning of learners, we're dealing with a South African context where most parents didn't have an opportunity to get an education, where most parents wouldn't know where to start with geometry or trigonometry with a learner. And so that's a key challenge then. And I want to know then, Mark, especially from you, what role do you think technology can play in facilitating parental involvement, but also in sort of, I suppose, closing the gap between parental skills and knowledge and their ability to facilitate learning for their children? Is there a role that technology can play to ensure that parents are able to help their learners and that their own educational shortfalls or shortcomings aren't a factor in their ability to help their learners or their children?
I think technology definitely has a role to play. Okay, let's start with just increasing general parental involvement. I think the first piece that's relevant is insight into just what's happening. So I think the average parent in the sector, well, the average parent of children at school doesn't actually know what's happening necessarily on a daily basis at school, or how their child is progressing. To the activity of reporting to parents is a burden on teachers. You've got to collect data and you've got to report it. The one thing that technology just does provide is the opportunity to collect data at scale. And data is something that needs to be turned into useful information, but you can collect data automatically, and you can do reporting for parents automatically. So the one thing that we can provide essentially is the opportunity for parents to be linked to learners and have some insight into what is happening on a real-time basis, which then gives them a platform, assuming they would like to support, let's assume the best, that they want to support their children or the children that they're caregivers for, or guardians of. They've got better insight into that. In terms of turning parents into teachers, or or helping them teach their children, there I don't think I don't think that that should be the focus. I think that it should be about motivation and supporting the parents to create an enabling environment. I'll just throw something out there from our work. Even when we visit schools, we find that only sort of 25% of learners, even with equitable access to devices and things like that, would actually engage with an opportunity to do their maths, practice their maths, etc., or physical sciences online using a platform like ours. But that similar number, 20 to 25% of learners being self-motivated, also came out of the Nokia mobile maths project years ago, etc. There's a few different projects that have found that in providing free access, what you find is 20 to 25% of learners are self-motivated. A fundamental pillar of motivating learners is the parental involvement, the context and the environment that parents set and how supportive that is. So I would say that giving the parents information about what is happening so that they've got accurate insights, and rather than focusing on trying to teach the parent to be a better teacher, I think they can provide better support, but it is actually almost around the pillar of motivation. So if you go to Hattie's detailed analysis of all of the different teaching interventions, you know, the number one intervention you can have is a highly motivated learner. The number two intervention you can have in terms of efficacy and impact is a motivated teacher. And a lot of our learners find the kind of motivational context quite challenging. And there's a lot of reasons why in South Africa that is difficult. But giving them some insights so they know what's going on, and giving them an opportunity to become a better pillar of support in terms of the motivation of a learner, I think that is an opportunity. And if you talk about tech, the one thing that parents can probably do in this context that is fundamentally in support of their child is, if there are online solutions that the child can use for learning, chances are that, you know, many of those children would need to borrow the device of their parent. So having a parent allow their child to use their device to enable their learning is something that we can try to communicate much more effectively. I think I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, it's complicated and subject specific, but motivation is universal.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Great insights there around, you know, trying to avoid, you know, professionalizing parenthood and making parents the professionals, but really focusing more on enhancing parental involvement through motivating parents, but also giving them access to data around what's happening in the classroom and what they can know about their children. But Wendy, I saw you were nodding as I was asking that question to Mark, and I want to know if you've got any insights onto that. You know, how you think we can enhance parental involvement using technology.
I think what I've noticed with parents now having access to their children's learning via the various technology platforms is parents are more aware of what is going on. So, and they want to know. And okay, now I'm talking about a high-tech environment where most parents are able to have access via their computers and cell phones to information. They want to know what's going on. So we use Google Classroom. The parents want to be guardians. They want to know what work is happening. They want to monitor. They want to be involved in their children's learning, and not necessarily to teach them, but to guide and assist them. Because when you're in the classroom, you as the teacher are the parent in that classroom. You are monitoring, you are guiding, you are cracking the whip, you are doing whatever you need to get the children in front of you to engage. But when the child is at home, unfortunately, the parent has to be the one who gets them to engage. And the parents that are wanting to be involved are doing that, and they're doing a sterling job. I think the parents I know everybody's cheering on the teachers and nurses and whatever, but I think we also need to be cheering on a bit of those parents. We've got children at home, and they are the teacher in terms of the human relationship that the teacher would have with the learner, you know, getting them to engage and those type of things. So yes, parents want to be involved. Parents are our partners. They're not our enemy of the teacher. We need to make sure they know what is going on. They don't need to understand maths and science in order to assist us. They need to support their child. They need to support the teacher, and they need to support the school. And then we form a triangle, which is the most stable shape.
Thank you for that. So essentially what you're saying is that what's important then is for parental awareness, more than parental skills in mathematics or physical sciences, but that parents need to know what is going on, and also be equipped with the know-how then of how to best support their learners, as we're seeing a lot of homeschooling happening at the moment. And I'm looking at, you know, the screen here, people sharing around, you know, what they think are core competencies that, you know, this era of education should be focusing on teaching. And this idea of empathy, the issue of creative thinking, research, collaboration, you know, the more what you describe as more humanistic, I suppose, characteristics, right? And there's a general fear that technology takes away the human interaction aspect, that technology robs people of the opportunity to have human engagement. And that also there's, you know, quite of a risk with introducing too much technology in terms of the socialization of learners, because schools are also environments for socialization more than they are just for learning. And so, Chinezi, I want you to also speak to that then. What's your take on this issue in terms of what core competencies we want our learners to have? So if we're saying empathy is a key component of, you know, the skill set that we want, critical thinking and all that, is technology potentially going to rob us of the opportunity to develop those human competencies?
Yeah, I don't think it has to, certainly, and I don't think it does so automatically. Before I just say something about that, I did want to reflect that what we experience our parents, you know, on the point of parents, is a lot of parents feel a tremendous amount of pressure at this time. It's just a hugely stressful time. First, for the children, they're wondering, are my kids, are they learning? Are they keeping up? And there's a lot of anxiety because they don't have the visibility or rapid feedback around it to say, is my child actually learning? And we're finding our parents put a ton of pressure on themselves to manage it, to have every minute of learning happening on one extreme, and to sort of losing sight on the broader. It's actually okay. Like this is they don't have to be. It doesn't have to be sort of minute to minute. And also, of course, dealing with all the stresses they're feeling around jobs, anxiety, isolation, family stresses. And so it's like part of the solving for our students is through our learning design, through the touch points teachers have with their classes and the students, is solving for supporting parents at this point. Because we found for parents, it's just we've had to communicate, try to de-stress our parents around in the moment. So that was just one end on the parents. But your question, does technology have to, does it dehumanize or limit our ability to develop collaborative problem-solving skills, develop empathy, to build character? No, not. I mean, I think there are some parts of it that are harder, but because we are all missing human interaction, particularly the extroverts amongst us are missing that. But by no means does it have to do that. So let's take 3 of those examples. Character. There's a wonderful opportunity right now for students to develop more ownership and more skills around managing their own learning, right? And we're seeing, particularly in the context of student motivation, sort of heightened student motivation, that we're hearing some of our panelists talk about, coaching students on how to organize their time, how to identify their questions and get them raised and research them and bring forward. Like, I think there's tremendous opportunity to develop those sort of character and learning skills that are critical, right? Secondly, in terms of just the collaborative skills, absolutely. And the opportunities to work together on projects, to connect students across grades, connections across schools, there's tremendous opportunity to learn to collaborate, clearly through a different medium at this point. But it doesn't take a ton of inventiveness to develop opportunities for collaboration if there is a connectivity to do so, right? But even if there isn't a lot of synchronous learning opportunity, even if there isn't the ability to stream and do lots of group-based work online, creating, supporting students to do project work at home absolutely creates opportunities for problem solving or to develop work that they can. I mean, there's still at least WhatsApp it in, right? Or you know, maybe lower still needs data, but lesser amounts of data. But you absolutely can build those collaborative problem solving skills, and in fact, you can really, I think, deepen the efficacy of it, because there's a ton of really important stuff happening around us that can be the subject matter for that work. And so if you can connect those explorations, connect those collaborations to all the dynamic volatility we're experiencing right now, it's very real. It's real for this is real for 5-year-olds, it's real for 15-year-olds, it's real for 50-year-olds. And so we can develop provocations, and we do develop provocations that are relevant for each of those for all our students, right? And then tech is a platform that is the platform we have right now for engaging with others across it, whether that's by submitting a written piece or engaging in a dynamic conversation with 3 or 4 peers.
Sure. Thanks a lot for that, Chinezi. I think what you're telling us then that is that, you know, this doesn't have to be an intervention where things are mutually exclusive and we're seeing technology and exclusion of, you know, the necessity for human interaction, but that there's an opportunity then, you know, to synchronize the intervention such that learners get a bit of both worlds. Sarah, I want to see what your take is on this. Because you spoke quite passionately around, you know, the role that technology should play as just a facilitator more than it is a replacement of one system or over the other. What's your take on the sort of risks that are associated with introducing technology? So assume we take a synchronous approach where we synchronize both approaches where there's, you know, physical contact and online learning. What kind of risks can we still anticipate in a space like that? And also if you have any opportunities that you think you can identify.
Sure. If I could just mention 2 other things that I would like to pick up on that was mentioned before. I think it's quite important again to say technology is a tool, and one needs to understand how you can best use technology. So technology does not need to be dehumanizing at all if it's used in the best possible way to support learning. The one aspect that I think where technology is more difficult to use is if one understands that cognition and affect, or cognition and your emotions are really intertwined. And it's difficult for technology to bring that human element that a good teacher brings. A good teacher is able to bring out the best in children, in that a good teacher makes it exciting, makes it interesting, brings that human element, tell the human stories, bring the human examples. Of course, one can also use technology to do that. But let's not underestimate that personal relationship between a good teacher and children, and how hugely important this is in teaching and learning. You will see that our best teachers are also teachers who have wonderful, warm relationships with students, but also relationships that require students to give their best. They challenge students, they challenge learners to rise up to the levels that you know the child can actually get to with good support from the teacher. And that for me is crucially important. And this is why I'm again saying that use technology for what technology can do very well. And there are many things that technology can do very well. But then it's also then understand, why do many children miss school so much? And I've heard many parents saying, you know, oh, my child can't wait actually to go back to school. They are missing their fellow students, their fellow learners. They are missing their teacher. And that is also an element that schools bring, that human element that technology can't give. So use the best of both worlds simultaneously. And just to say one thing that I've also seen on social media, which I really find heartening, is how many parents are really getting, again, a very good understanding of how difficult it is actually to be a teacher, and who are really now expressing appreciation for their teachers and the role that the teachers play in children's lives. So maybe this is also a gift of this crisis, to help us understand that a good teacher is a person who is really playing crucial role in the lives of our children. Then just one last thing maybe about technology. What I've seen at university level, but I am sure this is exactly the same also in schools, is that the technology that one does not necessarily see as a big technology. WhatsApp is being used in amazing ways at the moment throughout the country for teaching and learning purposes, and in most creative ways. And that again also is maybe what this crisis has brought us, is it unleashed wonderful creativity in so many people. And I'm hoping again, as I said before, that we will capture that and take that forward.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Again, I suppose then you emphasizing the need there for, intertwined interventions, more than an intervention that, looks at one approach, but to see this as perhaps technology as a complement to the human resource that we have. But you spoke to something that I remember I was speaking to the Jakes Gerwel team around this issue of, the cognitive dissonance that comes with being on lockdown. Our minds now, we've tricked them to believing that, we're still socially connected because at least we can connect through, Zoom, etc. But the body still yearns for the physical contact. When you're under stress, you usually get hugs from people. Now your body isn't getting hugs, your body isn't getting handshakes, all those things that are a norm. So perhaps there's a lockdown dissonance that maybe we need to explore. But the issue of then, the cognitive and the emotional that you're mentioning here is essential. But you're also talking about something relating to, using technology for what technology can do. And we know that technology can do a lot more than just good. Earlier on, I spoke around this issue of digital citizenship and what it means, and that's easily tied in with the ideas of cybersecurity. We understand that, cyberbullying is a reality not only for children, but also for adults. If you go on Twitter, you can easily be a favorite today, and tomorrow you are the villain of Twitter, and that's a reality. So one of the things you're mentioning is around using social media to learn, etc. Someone in the audience asked a question saying, how can we use technology in a learner-friendly manner? And I think that question ties in with this idea of what responsible digital citizenship is. So the question I want to ask, and I'm giving this to you and Mark, Wendy, is around, what cybersecurity measures are necessary to take in place, but also how do we make teachers, feel empowered enough to understand what cybersecurity is, but also to know how to then assess when, a learner's cybersecurity is compromised, or, what measures to take in the classroom to ensure that learners are using software or platforms that are safe for them, psychosocially, but also that they're in, private information is protected, because that's another key element to this. As we introduce high-tech strategies, there are risks that are involved. So really, what does responsible digital citizenship look like, at least from a teacher's capacity perspective? So what can teachers do, but also in terms of protecting learners? So Wendy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, this is not my area of expertise. It's a very technical question, but I will answer it in a non-technical way as best I can. First of all, the platforms you use. Teachers need training. If I look back at my experience and the experience of us going online in this crisis mode, we had to learn very quickly about the security settings in Zoom and Google Meet and all the other things that we had to do. So there was a lot of learning going on for the teachers themselves to make sure they had their security settings right. And we learned from experience. So things happened and then you had to put your security in place. And I think the various platforms also had to learn and increase their security platforms and protocols that they had in place. So that's the one thing. The second thing is to try, especially with younger learners, to use a closed domain type platform that only your school learners are able to access. So whether you create a Moodle type environment where only your kids can get on and can talk to each other and chat to each other, or you're using a Google Classroom type closed domain where you've got all your safety and security settings put in place by the admin. They know their thing and they've done it well. So I would suggest a closed domain, but From my experience, in terms of high school learners, they can hack anything. Whatever security you put in place and whatever protocols you in place, some kid is going to hack it and get in and whatever. So it's not about putting in the physical security. It's about teaching what is the values. When we talk about values education, like what is the right thing to do, where should you go. So it's less, and I agree with Sarah, it's less about the technology and more about the person, the values that we're going to teach them. It's going to keep them safe. As a parent at home, you can teach your child all sorts of what is right and wrong and values, but when they go out there into the world, they've got to make the choice and the decision. You only hope that you've given them the correct skills and tools to deal with everything. And I think with teachers, in terms of cybersecurity on a non-technical level, is to ensure that they understand the consequences of going to various sites and doing silly things, and teaching them the values, and hoping that should they be confronted with whatever situation is in front of them, that they will make the right decision. Most will, and some won't. And that is how it goes in everything, just about.
Sure, thanks. I realized I actually put you on the spot there with that one. But I think you've done a great job, right? Because you've sort of brought this idea that, in as much as we can try and put all the mechanisms to ensure that the tech is safe and tight, there's still a human element there where, firstly, we need to train teachers, for example, around, cybersecurity, but also ensuring that learners have the right values in place that, can at least guard them against doing something that might hurt another person. And Mark, what's your take on this? Are there any specific interventions that, for example, you've used with your app or your software that ensure the safety of learners? You're mentioning that learners use the app, for revision. They also get feedback and all those kinds of things. How is the confidentiality of the feedback ensured? What mechanisms have you guys taken in place to ensure that the safety of the learner and their private information is protected?
Okay, so I'm going to take like 6 steps back, right? So come back to what Sarah was sort of saying. There's 2 pieces. So at Siavula, we have a mantra, machines should do what machines do well, and people should do what people do well. And then the other comment is that there is a lot of research about learning. It's not that we don't know anything about learning. In fact, we know a lot about learning. And so what we want to do is we want to take what we know works in learning and try to enable it through technology. And that tends to be quite specific. So what works best for maths is not going to be the same as English. Necessarily. So where the risk increases is where we use so that you can almost make a risk profile. We're all into making profiles and having levels of risk at the moment after the president's speech. But generic platforms offer the greatest risk. If we're going to use WhatsApp, it's completely generic. There's no control. Moodle, as Wendy said, but specific to your school, it's not completely generic. And then Siavula is quite specific. We offer maths questions. You send us an answer, a machine marks it, and it gives you the solution. We've got some of your data. So the risk profile is much higher for generic platform usage. I'm going to use WhatsApp. I'm going to use Zoom. Zoom wasn't designed for schools specifically. Or I'm going to use Siavula for just my maths questions. We've got nothing to offer the English teacher. We've got nothing to offer the biology teacher, etc. So risk profile depends very much on how generic the platform you want to use is. But generic platforms have also got more reach. So there's this interplay. So what we should do is have a reason for using any technology before you start. So we're not going to, if you don't willy-nilly use technology, then you're already just limiting the opportunities and the risk factors. Just in terms of details, detailed security is complicated. It's a black art. So one of the things that we take very seriously, and I think all platforms will have to do this, and this introduces complexity at some level, is like personal information. We collect personal information. We ask learners for that. Actually, we've got to be very careful about restricting access to that. There are unsavory people who would love a database of 200,000 teenagers' phone numbers, for example, things like that. And we've got more than 200,000 teenagers' phone numbers in South Africa in our database. So you have to adopt kind of best security practices and things like that, but we also don't expose any of that information. So POPI is sort of coming in, but actually it's something to be taken very seriously. And I mean, I don't want to, if I wanted to adopt a kind of a very strict legal view, making WhatsApp groups with all your learners, if they haven't opted into sharing their personal information, their phone numbers and all of that information, that might actually be a risk factor. So I think WhatsApp is the most readily available platform, but from a kind of legal and risk perspective, actually, I don't think anybody's done a proper assessment of that. Like, it's a crisis, we're using what we can, but if you actually sat back with a legal team and a technical team and a security team, I think a lot of these things actually need to be thought out and reassessed. So generic platforms present the greatest risk. So then the next thing is to just try to understand why people behave differently online. And actually, I think it's a meta skill to teach students. It's about them. We talk about the digital citizenship, but psychologists have actually studied why people behave differently online. They feel that they're anonymous, they feel that there are no police, etc. There's a set of 6 reasons why people behave differently, and getting learners and teachers to reflect on that, and doing a little bit of training around the actual psychology of why people behave differently online, because everyone does it. The simple example being, it's easy for innuendo in SMSs and things like that, that wouldn't happen in real life. And why is that? Well, anyway, but there's a really great article if one looks up if you search for the six factors for self-inhibition online, you'll find a really great summary article that everyone should read. It's over 10 years old, and it gives you 6 reasons why people behave, and every teacher should have read it. Every learner should have read it. Please go find it and read it. I'll drop it in the chat quickly.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Mark. Great insights there, especially into, the risk profiling of different platforms. I think, there's a great learning there around what generic platforms, what risks are posed by generic platforms, and what it means to have specific platforms that have been tailored and their security measures have been used then to accommodate a specific context. And then also the challenge then is most of these platforms or apps target maths and science, and it's very difficult for teachers to find platforms that can, facilitate reading, platforms that can, facilitate lessons on life orientation. And these are also important subjects that we should not be bypassing, and focusing mainly on mathematics and the sciences. And the question you're asking there around why it is that people behave the way they behave online, that's a critical question, right? Because I think it asks a broader picture of human behavior in the absence of, observation. When you're not being observed, how do you behave? Even if you're not online, the way you behave in your room when there's no camera and no one looking at you is quite different to the way in which you behave when there are people around. So those are great considerations there, Mark. Thank you very much. So I was looking through the questions that we've been asked on the platform, and someone was asking, a question around readiness. We are in the space we're finding ourselves, and I'm looking at time. I'm sure Siseko Kumalo is almost going to kill me if, I don't move as fast as possible. But, we've conceptualize the space we're in, and we've come up with all these great suggestions, Mark. For example, the idea that people should look into, more specific platforms to use, that yes, it's okay to use WhatsApp to a level, but in terms of the POPI Act, there are considerations that people should have. But I really want to hear from you then, each taking just a minute, and I'm going to be quite prudent about this minute, really talking to what readiness strategies do you think would work best for a principal that's listening to this webinar and thinking, I would really like my school or the environment I'm in to have all this access to great tech or whatever, but really what readiness strategies can people use? Some schools may be starting to do this already, but Chinezi, especially in your context, what is it that Nova Pioneer had to do in order to prepare itself for integrating tech into the curriculum? What is important for schools to do now as we're shifting into this new era of education?
So, good question. So to be succinct, if I am a school leader thinking about getting my school ready for sort of this more dynamic, differentiated phase we're going to be ahead with a ton of pressure to catch up, of feeling the ton of pressure to catch up and trying to use tech. I think I'd be very clear on what my learning objectives are I'm trying to achieve going forward and why I'm using tech, right? I think I'd get very clear on that with my leadership team and with my faculty. I think I would plan a fair amount of engage, if there's training needed, fair amount of determine the limited number of platforms, do fewer things well than to do lots of things and not do anything well. So do fewer things well. Thirdly, I would figure out what training we need to learn and do that ahead of time and start doing that now. Once as soon as I'm clear what we're going to be doing, I'd start doing the training that we need to practice with each other. All right. Fourth, I would get feedback. I would make sure I'm spending time connecting with parents to say this is what we're going to be trying to do and build some understanding that we are not going to be perfect to start, but this is what we're trying to do and the steps we're going to take. And then finally, last thing, I think as we implement it, I'll just have lots of rapid feedback cycles. So start small, do it well, get lots of feedback, and improve it. And it doesn't have to be perfect from day one, but 2 months in, you'll be light years ahead and have lots of lessons. And then please connect with us so we can learn from you too. So that'd be my minute.
Thanks, Chinezi. Wendy, insights?
Yes, several insights, because in our school, when we started this, we actually started about 3 years ago, if not even longer. One thing that frustrates educators the most when trying to implement technology in your teaching in a blended way of learning is infrastructure. If the internet's not working, if the data projector doesn't go on, they lose it and then they just never use it again. So in my opinion, get the infrastructure right, make sure your internet connection is good, etc. Approach Vumatel, they sponsor schools if they go past with their fiber and so on. So that for me is first. Then second, I slowly allowed my more enthusiastic teachers to get going with their things, and then they would be sharing what is going on. And what was surprising for me was the learners actually forced us to move faster than what I anticipated. Because some teacher would be using Google Classroom to share an assignment, then they would come to me and say, but why don't you just share it on Google, whatever, why are we writing these notes down? Just share it with us, and so forth. And slowly they pushed us to go faster and faster. And then the training started. And the training started really intense, very well structured, thought out training on what we are using, which apps are we going to use. So we all do things in a similar way, and you create your structures and your files and all of those things so that it's easy. And then the learners also can get on board quite easily. And then once we had that mostly done, and we had about 70 to 80% of our teachers on board, we then moved on to pedagogy. And that was in this last year. Okay, so now we can all use these tools, but we don't use Flipgrid. We find Flipgrid, oh, it's so exciting. Let me see where I can force Flipgrid into every single lesson that I possibly can use it, because I love Flipgrid. But to actually think, okay, this is the lesson and which tool now actually supports the learning material. And that's where we were now. But that is 4 or 5 years down the line. So it was a long process. This crisis obviously has forced everybody to very quickly get their act together, those that weren't on board and those that were slowly learning. So my advice to any school out there going in this direction is have a very well thought out strategic 5-year or 4-year plan. Don't now jump on board because everybody needs to do this digital learning and everybody's going berserk, and then just start putting things together, because I think there's that saying about like the tailor that must measure twice and cut once or something like that, that you're going to waste a lot of time and money, and teachers are going to be frustrated. And when you eventually get it right, they're not going to want to take part.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Wendy. Insightful there. And I'm going to come to you, Mark.
So I always go back to, there's going to be a lot of challenges. There's always, technology evolves very rapidly. So I agree with Wendy about infrastructure, but I think a key piece is about the value that educators need to see in something. And it always reminds me of this. People tell me that teenagers get technology, kids get technology. I dispute that. Technology offers value to their lives, so they'll just try stuff because they use their devices and technology to communicate with their peers. And if you're a teenager, your social circle is the most important thing in the entire world. So if you have to copy all your contacts from BlackBerry Messenger to WhatsApp, you'll do it one at a time. You'll push through that barrier because you see a personal value in it. So I think I think a really good thing to consider is how can the access to technology add real value to your educators, first and foremost for them. What is the personal value that technology could add to them? And then there's a ton of resources available online, etc. So I think that once you've got some infrastructure in place, I would start with trying to make sure that that the technology is adding value to the educators, even if it's just connecting with teachers overseas and getting ideas for lessons and things like that and reading blogs. But then to experience online learning before you try to deliver it, doing one of the courses through edX or Coursera. They're free, they're open, you know, they can be accessed for free if you don't want the accredited or the accreditation. And actually going through the experience of doing an online course about online teaching, using these platforms, getting real first-hand experience for what it's like when the time's out while you're trying to submit a response and you've got to refresh the page. And what does it mean when you watch a video of somebody waffling on for 30 minutes about something and then you get asked multiple choice questions about it? And I think just that real experience for them, but as individuals, before you try to put it in the classroom, is a really useful way to get them over the barrier. They've experienced it and they're extracting value from it, and before you move. Anyway, that's just my view.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for that. And lastly, Sarah, what are your insights?
I don't have personal experience with implementing this technology in schools, but I can briefly tell you, working with academics and getting them on board on using blended learning has been an interesting journey. And what I've learned from that is you will have those who will fiercely resist, hear them and listen to them, but carry on. Cajole, support. And I think it's a combination of both. The support that people must also have when they go on this journey of being somewhat also scared of this technology and also being quite skeptical. And then also see the successes and celebrate the successes. Because once people see that things are working, or they see the excitement around successes, then they become less skeptical and they would be then willing to take on the good stuff that they see happening in other people's courses. I'm glad that we started in the Faculty of Education a few years ago and asked and basically told colleagues that they must be able to work also online and in a blended mode with students, because I strongly believe that teacher educators must model the practices that they also teach students. So we can't tell students that they need to be able to teach with technology, and we are not modeling it ourselves as people at teacher education institutions.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sarah. That's very helpful. I don't want to mince your words or try and summarize what you say. I think, you know, Khumalo is going to do a great job for us in doing that. And I know, Siseko, you've been sitting here, and for everyone, you know, just a bit of context, Siseko loves engagements. So this is a great space for him. So I'm really happy that he's here. He also has a great way of just pulling themes together. So I'm excited that he's here. He's also a Mandela Road Scholar, so I get to bully him every now and then whenever I want. So thank you, Siseko. Really just, you know, a response of what do you see to have transpired in today's dialogue, and what key insights have you drawn out?
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. Thanks, Zolani. So thank you very much to the input from all our colleagues. I think it's quite useful and insightful with respect to, you know, where we are not only as individual schools, but also with respect to nationally with education and I suppose the crisis that we have been forced into. I just want to speak to three things for me, which I picked up saliently through the conversation. Some, of course, were addressed explicitly and some were not. For me, I think the big question that we need to consider is the question around the aims of education, right? So whether we're integrating technology or not, what are we teaching for, right? And we've seen a particular analysis of this discussion or particular focus around the South African context around how we framed aims or the aims of education in Ursula Hoodley's recent publication, where she traces the history around or the philosophies of education in the South African context, from fundamental pedagogics under apartheid to, of course, what we have currently, which is the CAPS system. And in between all of these, so you've got curriculum 2005 in the early 90s, moving into the OBE curriculum, moving into the national curriculum statements, and now the CAPS system. And the question is fundamentally with all of that, whether we're talking about teacher education or learners, what's the aim around that particular curriculum? And I think for me, answering that question, and Sarah pointed quite lovely to this, was this question around learning, right? And sort of distinguishing between those. So for me, that was a massive question, I think, that was saliently addressed with, of course, the integration of technology, but I would have loved to see a bit more of that happening, which brings me to the second point, or the second observation, and we talked to this, Zolani, you mentioned it, which is the concept of citizenship. And I think that what we see as an insightful move with respect to what's happening with the integration of technology in our schools right now is that this is democratizing access to knowledge, right? Which is where, of course, Mark comes in with the work that they're doing, in many respects, moving in that direction that's being taken globally with respect to knowledge production through open access, right? So, and I'm quite excited about that particular move with respect to sort of democratizing the knowledge project, as it were, not only at the basic school level, but also moving that particular idea up into the university space as well, as I am a university lecturer myself. So there's something to be said around this question of citizenship and the democratization of knowledge. But to move on to I think for me, the downside around technology integration, specifically as we're reaching into the homes of our learners and our students, I think about this question of surveillance and what that means with respect to how many people have access to our lives and our personal lives, and that particular distinction that gets made between the public life and the personal life, and how all of that then influences, I suppose, this question around education necessarily, which goes back to that first, I think, point for me, which is the aims of education. And if you go back to Richard Rorty's seminal paper, where he makes that distinction between education as individuation and as socialization, I think that the role around technology inclusion in our education system is pushing us towards socialization. And I don't know whether it's a kind of socialization we're looking for specifically at the moment, as I say, with respect to that question around around surveillance. And the final thing that I think, sort of came up from all of our panelists was this question around, or this distinction between teaching critical skills, teaching and teaching content, right? I think quite a lot, or what we're seeing at the moment and what we've seen in the South African context, and again, as a derivative of that first observation, is that a lot of our teachers teach for the test. We don't teach for critical thinking skills in our schools. And what happens is that when students come to us at university level, we have to do that backlog work of capacitating students to be able to engage with content at a critical level. And again, I think for me, the fundamental question is, what is the aim of education? Is it necessarily to advance oneself through social mobility, for instance, upward social mobility through access to opportunities? Is it around this question of modeling particular values that we care about as a nation? Is it a question of being able to apply one's skills in various contexts where one might find themselves situated and located? Or is it a combination of those? And if it's a combination, how do we then begin to do that work of teaching for that particular purpose? And in some respects, I think for me, the opportunity that comes with education, I think, is teaching from, or using technology, or technology integration in education, is that question of driving, I suppose, that holistic deep learning approach, deep learning not only with respect to content and theory, but deep learning in terms of creating a model citizen that we can be proud of. And I do think one of the things, just as a parting shot, Zolani, I do think one of the things that this particular crisis, this global crisis, is showing us is maybe it will challenge some of the Finnish studies that were done, which contest the use of technology in the classroom, because the finish suggested that the use of technology actually is a drawback with respect to learners being able to effectively develop skills of reading and writing, right? So as well as mathematics. So maybe what this opportunity assists us with is moving in a direction that is disproving that research. Thanks, Zolani.
Thanks a lot. I kind of anticipated that I would have to stop you. It was something I was kind of psychologically preparing myself for. But I think I really am not going to try and mince the sort of summary that you've provided us with. I think you've done a great job. Thank you for that. So this was the last episode of a series of dialogues, but I kind of want to communicate to everyone that, you know, you still can anticipate more from us. We're likely to have more conversations that will be targeted at different audiences. Here we're targeting teachers, you know, lecturers, people who are the service providers in the education space, but also there's something perhaps that needs to be done for service users who are the learners, the students, and everyone else. And we're planning on taking quite an active role in addressing that. But for those who are interested in the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship, I previously shared a slide, which I'm going to share again with key details around, you know, our nominations campaign. You can nominate a learner at grade 12 whom you think would make an excellent teacher, and there's a reward if your learner makes it onto the fellowship. But also, you know, applications are opened at the moment. We've currently opened we've opened applications for the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship. So this is this can be accessed through our website. So if you go to www.jgfellowship.org, you should be able to go through our application. So please do share the information with your learners and do nominate anyone that you think. It doesn't have to be a learner. It can be anyone that you think, you know, would make an excellent teacher. We really want to choose the best. Our motto is that we think the best learners should become teachers. Which is kind of sort of the opposite of what we're seeing at the moment. But really, thank you so much for staying with us. And I want to thank our panel for the great discussion. I really appreciated the level of insight that has been here. But I also want to thank people who attended today for the great questions that you asked. So we're going to have an output document that is going to be circulated and made available to everyone. So this will be, you know, a summary or a synthesis of what transpired today. We also are going to make this video available. So we've recorded the webinar and it will be available on our YouTube channel. I know someone asked through the questions earlier on how they can get access to the previous two webinars. If you go to the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship channel on YouTube, you should be able to access our webinars. Even this one will be made available to you. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a great time. Have a lovely day.
Hi, my name is Koen Timmers. I'm a Belgian educator. I've been teaching for 20 years in 2 different schools. The first school is the teacher training department of my city's University College, and I train the future teachers how to use technology in the right way in their classroom. And in another school, I've been teaching, I've been in a distance learning project for 12 years, and we've been teaching web design to young adults, half time at home and half time on a distance. I also launched a lot of global educational projects. First question. So, did I spot some good practices where teachers have been using online learning? Yes, I did. I think it's very important as a starter that we make a distinction between synchronous and asynchronous online teaching, because the synchronous teaching would be using video conferencing tools. The asynchronous teaching would be like recording videos or podcasts or other media. And I believe that every topic and age and even school requires a different approach. So basically the teacher has to be a pedagogical engineer, making that right judgment of matching the technology to his or her subject basically. And it could be that it makes more sense to record a video with Matt and to teach online synchronous using a video conferencing tool to teach a new language like French because you want to hear your students. The live teaching has the advantage of being able to interact. The students are able to ask questions, and you can even put the students in breakout rooms. While with the video lessons, students can learn on demand. They can basically learn at their own pace as well. So they can choose to pause a video and rehearse and watch the video several times, which has a lot of advantages as well. I've been doing this myself for 5 years in a refugee camp, in which I shipped my own laptop to the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya with 200,000 refugees, and I started to teach them math and science with Skype. And we now have a community of 425 teachers who are doing the same. We even built our own school in a refugee camp. And in another project, the Climate Action Project, we are having 100,000 students across 98 different countries, and they record videos to share their findings about climate change. And this way, students globally can learn from each other. So technology also allows to make learning global. The second question with John Hattie. So I think that content and pedagogy is key, and the technology may replace the classroom, but not the teacher. The teacher will always have to find the right learning approach to match to certain content and subjects. And what's happening right now is that people hear that Zoom is a great tool, or that Screencast-O-Matic allows to record videos, etc. And then they start using the tool, and then they start thinking about how am I going to do this? And they try to find a tutorial, and that's a very wrong way to get started with online learning. What you should do is try to judge which is the best learning approach, which pedagogy am I going to instruct my students? Is this about collaborative learning? Is another way the best way to go? And then they try to find out which tool gives them the best ability to do that. And there's been a major discussion about two different directions, basically. Some people claim that knowledge-driven education is the way to go, like in the UK and other countries. And other people claim that problem-based learning and with more focus on skills is very crucial. So when it comes to distance learning, all of a sudden, people start using technology and there's no issue anymore. Everybody starts instructing the students for 95%, and I'm pretty sure that we can do this differently as well. Third question. Yes, I came across of examples of online learning which failed because some teachers know a lot of tools which are really cool to use, but they all try to combine all those tools during one lesson, and that's not a good thing. I think you need to keep it simple, and you need to, as a teacher, use as little amount of tools as possible. And also, schools have to make that decision that every teacher a student has uses the same tool, and not like, for example, Google Hangout with one teacher and another one is using Zoom and another one is using Microsoft Teams. Also, it's very important to test and to use quizzes to know what your students remember about what you have been teaching, and also send out some anonymous surveys so you know as a teacher how students feel about this change, because that's what it is, you know, when you start using technology all of a sudden maybe students don't learn as you think they are learning. And also a lot of cases in which teachers try to teach synchronous, so live, when asynchronous is the better option, because in some households we have 3 children and just 1 laptop, and in case they all those 3 children have live sessions at one time, that would be a disaster for them. So in that case, a video class would be a better option because they can learn at any time, anywhere basically. Don't really know about which countries have moved to online learning and which one did it well. I don't really have a good overview of that one. But basically it hardly really relies on internet connection and having a device. So in Belgium, the Minister of Education made a program in which every student who doesn't have a computer at home gets a refurbished laptop. They're doing this with Close the Gap, which is an organization, an NGO, and our main internet provider is giving internet access for free during the next months. But in other countries, and especially like African countries and India and also in Asian countries, many students don't have an internet connection or no device at home, and then remote learning or online learning is a disaster, obviously. There are some solutions. There are like very cheap technology like the Rachel device, which makes online content offline available. But I think in those cases that the teachers have to provide textbooks and paper and this kind of materials to the students so they can still learn. And then the final question, I don't think that the role of the teacher is that different. The teacher still has to be there for the student, even when the teacher is not teaching. Sometimes the student, and especially the younger students, really are very eager to see their teacher, you know, just to have an informal chat with them, explain what's happening. Some of the students may have lost people in their friends or family, and they want to speak about it. We cannot forget about this part. Then it's very important again to realize that technology replaces the classroom but not the teacher. The teacher still has to just judge about the right pedagogy and the best way to spread knowledge to the students, and making sure that every student is part of that, and not just those who have technology, and too bad for those who don't.